onto this call and say at the outset that I'll be chairing the meeting with strict adherence to standing orders, and I look for your cooperation. And if you want to make a contribution, I ask you to use the chat bar. Before moving on to the formal agenda, Andrew, can you highlight any apologies or substitutions?
Yes, Convener. An apology from Councillor Rorty, who's been substituted by Councillor McCulloch. Apology from Councillor Danish Ashraf, Councillor Goldie and Councillor Morgan, and also from Councillor Catherine Johnson being substituted by Councillor Tom Johnson. Are there any further apologies?
Thank you, colleagues. It is on to item 1, declaration in interest of the ethical standards. Any interest to be declared? I don't see any.
So interest, sorry, Leader. Can I declare interest? Sorry, tried to put the chat bar there. Just at item 6 around the the Crisis and Community Hub contract award. Is a member of NHS Lanarkshire, but it doesn't stop me from taking part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 2, minutes of the Audit and Scrutiny Panel, 22nd of September. Any comments, questions or queries in relation to the minutes? Okay, thank you. It then takes us on to item 3, which is the Community Investment Fund, our annual update. To invite Elaine to focus on this report. Elaine.
Thank you, Convener. This report gives the annual update on the estimated resources available through the Community Investment Fund to support capital investment over the next 10-year period. It shows that despite the challenges faced, the CIF has largely held up and there's no significant change anticipated in the level of available resources since the last update was presented to you in December 2020. At that last report, the estimated value of the CIF was 540 million. And at that time, I highlighted that this represented a very prudent view to reflect the economic uncertainty associated with the pandemic at that time. This latest update today shows that in still maintaining that prudent approach, there'll be a very minor reduction of 5.6 million in available resources over 10 years, and that represents a movement of about 1% since last year's estimate. The report also highlights that while we have chosen to continue to err on the pessimistic side when estimating resources, we are seeing some encouraging signs around household growth. And it's encouraging to note that the actual number of properties which contribute to the council tax base has grown over the last 12-month period at a higher rate than we had previously anticipated. And looking more to the future, the potential for new build developments, our monitoring shows that despite the pandemic, planning applications have increased by around 25% during 2021, which again is another positive sign for the CIF. Despite these encouraging signs, however, we are maintaining a prudent approach to estimating future resources until we see more evidence that that promising trend can be and will be sustained. The remainder of the report gives some sensitivity analysis across the 3 main variables that affect the modelling. First of all, the Council's commitment to continuing to ring-fence 1% of council tax, and the report highlights that any decision not to do so in any one year would have a big impact on the investment fund, reducing it by up to 42 million in any one year. The other 2 variables are the extent of household growth and the investment factor, which is relying on interest rates. So some sensitivity analysis in the report, which highlights to committee the impact that changes around these variables can make, either positively or negatively. But in summary, I would say this is a very positive report, which shows that capital investment plans that we have in place remain prudent, sustainable and affordable. Modelling assumptions will remain prudent, but will also remain under review with every likelihood that we'll see an improved position at future updates. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions on that.
Thanks very much, Elaine. There's a request from Councillor Linden to ask a question, make a comment. Jordan?
Thanks very much, Leader. Just in relation to what Elaine touched on at section 2.8 of the report, Elaine, around the housing and planning growth, I guess the question is, as we see that positive news whilst considering your kind of prudent approach, when can we start to say that there is a definite trend in terms of financial monitoring, and as a subsequent to that, when we see that trend established, when will we start to see that start to be included in terms of future resource availability?
Well, my suggestion would be that we continue to keep it under review. We know that the implications of the pandemic are still not known and are still being felt. So a further year of monitoring, I would suggest, would give us more confidence around adjusting the assumptions in the model. Our 5-year capital programme is set, and the time to consider any increase, I guess, would be at the point that we're looking to reset that capital investment programme. But as I said, everything will remain under review and subject to further reports if indeed the position does improve to a point that I can be confident around that.
Colleagues, no one else has posted the chat bar. Can I direct you to the recommendations? There are 2 recommendations in page 19 and 1 recommendation in page 20. Do you agree to the recommendations? Thank you very much, colleagues. Colleagues, we now move on to item 4, the challenge net zero by 2030. And with your approval, I intend to adopt a different approach in presenting this report. You can see from the report that James McKinstry is the author of it. And I'm going to ask James to give an overview and then to focus on the building fabric issues, which are highlighted in the report, as he has operational responsibility for that. I'm then going to invite Andrew McPherson to comment on the waste issues highlighted in the report and also on transport. Then Nicole Patterson to focus on biodiversity, and then Lausanne McMurray to focus on the community engagement processes which will be adopted. By adopting this different approach, I think we give appropriate scrutiny to a very important and highly contemporary issue. Does that meet with your approval? Okay, to we begin then, James. And at the end of each presentation, there will be an opportunity for members to ask questions. So, James, would you like to give us an overview first?
Thank you very much, Leader. As the committee is aware, the Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, and there's been much focus on that declaration and the work that we've been doing within the Council and indeed across North Lanarkshire as a whole, particularly in this year, which was the year of COP26. So what this report does, it provides a summary of the climate action and the strategy that we've been taking within the Council, and indeed what we'll be doing as we go forward. As the Leader mentioned, it covers 6 important areas, and I'm here to cover a couple of these areas, and other officers are here to cover some of these areas as well. This is to kind of reflect the strategic importance that we place on this subject matter within the Council. So if I could start off with just kind of covering the policy development part of that, and if I could ask you to refer to paragraphs 2.2 to 2.5 of your report, and I just want to just highlight to you some of the key things we've been doing. And as I mentioned in my introduction there, yourselves as a council made the decision in 2019 to declare a climate emergency, and as officers we have taken that forward on your behalf. We've prepared an updated climate plan, which is out for consultation at the moment, and that climate plan has been presented to the Environmental and Transportation Committee of the Council, and we'll also be bringing back the final climate plan to that committee as well. And through that work
James, you're breaking up quite a bit. You're breaking up quite. Can you put your video off and see? We're struggling.
Thank you very much. Is that better? Is that better, Leader? Yeah. Okay, so apologies for that. So through the work that you've done as elected members and we've done as officers in the climate emergency and preparing the climate plan, we have got this area very much integrated in the work that we're doing across all services.
James, we appear to be losing you.
Sorry, Jim, I think we're losing you. I think
James, are you still on the call?
Yes, I'm still on the call.
Jim, I
That's
think it's
better.
you.
I think we can now hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just continue. Just someone was mentioned there, Leader, that it may have been yourself
Yeah,
that's
try-
losing connection. Okay, so what we've been doing is we've been getting this policy objectives being getting integrated into service areas across the council, and what we've seen since 2015-16, which is our baseline year, we've actually seen a reduction in carbon emissions of 48% across the council area. So I think we have been making good progress across the council, and we need to continue to do that as we go forward, because the challenges are going to become even more as we go forward. If I can then move on to building fabric, which is in section 2.9 of your report. Building fabric accounts for almost 45% of the carbon emissions made by the council, so it's by far the biggest carbon contributor in the work that we do. And what we've been doing is we've been improving energy systems across our buildings, across our corporate buildings, and that's touched on paragraph 2.9.1 of the report. We've been reducing our use of assets as well across the council. We have been doing rationalisation where we can. And again, in corporate assets, where we're doing new builds, for example, the new community hubs, we are making significant environmental improvements in the work that we're doing. What we're seeing is a near 43% improvement in energy performance in the new buildings that we're creating. And we quite often, people mention the passive house standards. We are currently providing 9.2% improvement on passive house standards in the buildings that we're doing it, and we expect that to rise to a 15% improvement over the next few years of projects that we're going to be commencing very soon. As well as the kind of corporate estate within the council housing, there's been significant work that's been done to improve the energy improvement within council houses, and that's detailed in 2.9.3.1 of the report. And similar to the corporate estate as well, as we build new houses, we're seeing significant improvements getting built in that area as well. So as I kind of mentioned just at the start of this section, building fabric accounts for 45% of our carbon emissions in the council, and what we've been doing through our capital planning is we've been targeting that area quite significantly, and we have been making significant improvement on that. And what I'll do before I hand over to Andrew, who'll cover the next part of the report, I'll maybe just pause to see if there's any questions that anyone has.
Thanks. I'm not sure. I think we've lost the leader. I think Jim's dropped off connection-wise. So, any comments or questions to the first part? Don't see anybody. Don't think anybody's in the chat bar. Am I right, Andrew? Okay.
That's correct.
James. Okay, can we move on to the next part? Thanks, James.
Okay, thanks for that. And apologies for the confusion there with the computer connections. If I could maybe just ask Andrew McPherson just to come in and just talk about some of the transport work that we've been doing.
Yep, thanks, James. I'll touch on waste and transport if that's okay. So the first part is really to do with waste. And I think everybody knows the most effective way to reduce our carbon emissions with waste is actually to produce as little waste as we possibly can. But there's always going to be a need to dispose of the residual factor of that waste, but in the most effective and most sustainable way possible. Within the report, it does mention the Clyde Valley residual waste contract. And through that contract, it's really allowed the council, in partnership with the 4 other local authorities who are involved, to combine the resource to deliver a long-term, low-carbon solution. The contract allows all residual waste from the council to be diverted from landfill and processed through an energy from waste plant at Dunbar. And by doing this, we will reduce our carbon emissions by roughly about 20,000 tonnes per annum across all 5 local authorities, that is, and North Lancashire's share of that is around 7,500 tonnes. So a significant carbon saving from that. However, it's not really the end of the improvements with this contract. Residual Energy, who actually operate the plant on behalf of the local authorities, They have committed to being a net zero company by 2030. And to achieve that, they are introducing carbon capture technology into the Dunbar plant, which will again further reduce the carbon footprint associated with this process, and obviously will reduce the council's carbon footprint in the process as well. As stated before, though, the best way to reduce our carbon emissions is actually reduce the amount of waste we actually produce in the first place. And we continue to look at how we can increase our overall recycling levels to affect that. The most recent introduction of that is the Smart Bin project, which we are now being piloted in North Lanarkshire in partnership with Zero Waste Scotland. The purpose behind this is really to build data on the weights across all our domestic bins, and then introduce targeted media campaigns within that area, and then see what impact that has on the overall levels of waste. This then lets us know what messages really have the greatest impact, and this then can be rolled out across not just North Lanarkshire, but indeed on a national scale as well. There also continues a drive to further develop our remaining waste service assets within the council, which in turn will lead to further sort of decarbonisation of the service. Taking an example, our RCVs have a fuel consumption of around 4 miles per gallon. So anything we can do to reduce the miles travelled by our HGV fleet is a good thing. And ways of doing that, first of all, we're looking at Ward Park. We're going to turn that into a waste transfer station. That allowed the bulking of waste materials, both from waste and land services, at Ward Park, which in turn will cut down the number of miles travelled. At Dalmacoulter, which was one of our old landfill sites, we've now achieved planning consent to market that as a materials recovery facility or a waste transfer station, and that will provide a central location for any third party. Now that does two things. It actually hopefully will drive down or increase competition within our contracts, but also by having a facility right in the heart of our district operated by a third party, then hopefully that will allow less travelling time for our vehicles, because we can retain everything within North Lanarkshire. And even doing small things like the skip sizes at our HWRC sites, we're increasing those from 30 cubic metres to 40 cubic metres, and that will not only increase the capacity of the waste at our sites, but also reduce the journeys by vehicles by 25%. And sorry, that's my dog in the background. Somebody's just pressed the doorbell. In addition to that, solar farms, we're looking to maximise the potential of our redundant assets at Auchinleigh and Dalmacoulter, and we're going to introduce solar farms across both sites. The limiting factor there tends to be the grid connection, but because we've already been producing electricity there or through the burning of landfill gas, then that grid connection already exists, so it makes it economically viable. And with regards to our council fleet, we have now a defined programme to move all our light goods vehicles, just over 300 of those, to low emission vehicles during financial year 2027-28. With regards to HGVs, which we have roughly about 80 of, there's less certainty on that at the moment, because simply due to technology is not really advanced as for light goods vehicles. But we are looking to replace all those with low carbon fuel alternatives by 2030. But it is important that we don't put all our eggs in one basket. The fuel is likely to be a mix of electricity and hydrogen, so as we're not caught out in case there's power cuts, that type of thing. But I think also in the actual report itself, you will notice that it's very important that our infrastructure also keeps up with our move to low carbon fuels. And to make sure that we are doing that, we are in discussion with a number of external partners to make sure that we've got, if we are moving to hydrogen, we've got sufficient supply of hydrogen, and also we've got enough charging points for electric vehicles. And that's an overall quick summary. Happy to answer any questions.
Apologies, colleagues, for the connectivity issues. Are there any questions to Andrew? Claire has posted. Claire Bartley, please.
Thanks, Leader. Just checking, Andrew, the changes to Ward Park, will that have any impact on the users, like the public or anything going to Ward Park?
Come back in that, Leader, yep. No issues at all there, because it's a separate part of the actual, it's separate from the HWRC site. It's an actual other part of the yard.
Thanks, Andrew.
Any further questions to Andrew? Members, an opportunity? No. Takes us on to Nicole. Nicole, would you like to focus on biodiversity, please?
Thank you very much, Leader. So I'll cover both biodiversity and active travel. So members will be aware that in obviously June 2019, we declared a climate emergency. In June 2021, the Council became a signatory to the Edinburgh Declaration, which really declared a biodiversity emergency. And in so doing has confirmed our commitment to protecting biodiversity. Full details of the declaration are within paragraph 2.3 of the paper. But in terms of demonstrable actions, we've secured Green Growth Accelerator funding from Scottish Government, which will fund the development of a full business case for the Green Park Green Power project, installing a water source heat pump and solar array at Strathclyde Country Park to generate green energy to offset current usage, as well as the opportunity to enhance the water sports centre to create a permanent home for the delivery of the Active Schools project. We're also investing in wildflower planting demonstration areas across our country parks, where we can use these as exemplar projects to show the benefits of wildflower planting and a change to more naturalised land management. In partnership with SEPA, members will be aware that the Dumbreck and Garrow River remeandering project is well underway in Kilsyth, and that project was recently showcased by BBC Reporting Scotland as a climate change exemplar during COP26. And finally, in the whistle-stop tour of biodiversity projects, we're creating new woodlands, planting a tree for every primary age child in North Lanarkshire, which is some 37,000 new trees, on 3 sites that will cover a combined site hectareage of 15 hectares. This will exist at Pallisrigg Country Park, Calderbank and Overton, and the planting undertaken here will undertake the Clyde Climate Forest Vision. If I move on then to active travel, members again will be aware that in terms of active travel, the Council's first active travel strategy was approved at committee on the 25th of August 2021. The strategy, as we know, aims to provide suitable infrastructure and facilities to support the uptake of active travel, reducing reliance on the private car. The strategy allows key strategic and local connections to be identified to improve walking, wheeling and cycling across our area. By identifying these missing active travel links at a local level, we can seek to improve connections and create 20-minute neighbourhoods. These 20-minute neighbourhoods will much better allow our communities to reach the majority of their essential needs within a 20-minute walk or journey from home. The strategy will lead to increased levels of walking, cycling and wheeling and a reduction in transport-related carbon emissions in North Lanarkshire. Delivery of this work across teams has already begun at pace with the creation of new infrastructure, which is detailed in the report in paragraphs 2.6.2 and 2.6.5 to 2.6.12. These range in scale from the provision of cycle stands throughout North Lanarkshire to encourage active travel, together with bikeability cycle training, the range of projects within there outlined in 2.6.2 to encourage pedestrian accessibility, which is further detailed within Appendix 1 of the report, which will all contribute to the successful implementation of the Council's active travel strategy. Some of the projects also include aspects of adaptation, preparing us for the future via improving drainage to reduce or prevent flooding. And as I say, the full list of those schemes is in Appendix 1. But it doesn't stop there. The schemes range through construction of a new roundabout at Orchard Farm in 2.6.5 to support the delivery of the Moss End Rail Freight Park, through to 2.6.6, the delivery of the Pan-Lanarkshire Transport Corridor, as we know, a critical north-south road and active travel route connecting the M74 to Ravenscraig. Again, at Motherwell Street, the improvements there create sustainable travel, multimodal transport interchange, which is in partnership with ScotRail, Transport Scotland and SPT. And last but not least, Motherwell Station and Ravenscraig active travel links, together with the creation of the Ravenscraig and Motherwell active travel hubs. All projects working us towards the creation of a cohesive active travel network across North Lanarkshire to meet the net zero aims of the Council. Leader, I'm happy to take any questions on that whistle-stop tour.
Collins, any questions to Nicole? I don't see it. Yes, Paul Kelly.
It's just a really quick question, just around the Green Growth Accelerator and the work Strathclyde Park. What's the timescales, Nicole, for that? I wasn't too sure.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kelly. So the timescales for the initial bid and the feasibility is by the end of March, which then potentially could release, if we're successful, up to £10 million of investment in the park thereafter.
Des, do you want to highlight anything, especially in relation to what we highlighted during the place, the plan, the vision?
Thank you, Leader. No, I think I just make that point to the committee. You can see the breadth of projects and activities that are taking place across the services. I just want to give the reassurance to members that they are part of a cohesive plan back to the plan for North Lanarkshire. This is about creating a set of circumstances and conditions where basically anyone who lives in North Lanarkshire, regardless of whether they live in one of our villages, one of our main towns, and whatever street that may be, will have active travel options in their future that allow them to make their way to and from places of work. 20-minute neighbourhood principles firm like the heart of what we're planning to do. But we're also creating an economy and an investment environment that breeds now new opportunity for people. So the types of businesses we bring, how sustainable they are, and their own climate principles are hugely important parts of what we're trying to achieve here as an organisation and as a place. So it's just to bring that point back, convener, that it is absolutely inherently linked together. It is not a series of one-off projects and fragmented in any way, shape or form. It is part of a greater plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Des. Thanks very much, Nicole. I don't see any other names on the chat bar. We'll move on to Lausanne. Lausanne, you want to focus on community engagement processes, please?
Thank you, Leader. I just want to check, can everybody hear me okay? Am I clear enough?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. During this short input, I want to expand on some areas of work with and within our communities from a few perspectives. As members will be aware, community and stakeholder engagement covers a wide variety of approaches designed to work with our communities to involve, influence and inspire action for change. And I suppose a really good example of that, if you look at section 2.8.1 of the report, is the Act 21 event aimed at young people, which saw participation from over 8,500 young people. And it's our work with young people and communities that I want to focus on for a couple of minutes. So in terms of our work with communities to support the critical message of climate protection, our active and creative communities, community learning and development and education and families teams in particular work collaboratively with community groups and our young people in a number of ways to highlight that critical environmental message we want to share. For example, through art exhibitions, interpretation of museums collections, community drama workshops, work with local artists. For example, during COP26, we had a collaboration with Robert Montgomery, who's a world-renowned artist, and we displayed his light installation, Mine Hope, in one of our museums. And alongside that, you know that we seek opportunities all the time to engage and start conversations with young people. And it's these young people that I want to talk about now. And I want to make an apology first to our Youth Climate Ambassadors group on the basis that there's absolutely no way that I can ever hope to be as articulate and inspiring in telling the story about their work as they have been in a number of our activities to support the issue of climate change. So these young people are aged 13 to 18. They share an interest in climate change and environmental issues, and they've been collaborating online on a weekly basis throughout the pandemic and face-to-face outdoors where we could, supported by the youth work team. Importantly, these sessions gave an opportunity for us to collaborate and learn together as the young people contributed their own views and knowledge every week. That led on to the production of a short film and the hosting of a local screening. The film Dear World Leader was produced as part of the Youth Climate Film Project, an initiative delivered by Keep Scotland Beautiful with funding from the Scottish Government and National Lottery. Hugely successful, and the project enabled people to research the issues, decide what changes they would like to see and articulate that in a really inspiring and meaningful way. As a result of that, 2 representatives from the group were invited to join the Act Now 2021 coordinating group. And this is a North Lanarkshire Partnership strategic group. So it's part of the North Lanarkshire Partnership, key strategic area of work for the North Lanarkshire Partnership, and these young people's voices were heard in the development of that strategy that's now been published, and they will continue to influence its development. And it was about ensuring that it was accessible to young people, not just a strategy that sits on a shelf. And they're working on a short film summary version to make it more accessible. It's anything but blah, blah, blah for our young people. Inspiring and influencing within the community, they've carried out litter cleanups, undertaken conservation at Barons Hall Reserve, for example, as well as generally learning more about climate change and related topics, and importantly, sharing their learning on social media channels, hugely powerful. They were also invited to be part of the delivery team for the hugely successful North Lanarkshire Schools Conference on Climate Change. Over the summer, they hosted the Minister for Environmental, Biodiversity and Land Reform at Strathclyde Park for a Q&A session, and the launch of a new national programme of events that put the voices of young people in Scotland at the heart of climate conversations during COP26. So moving on to more general work in the community, the climate emergency, as I've said, has been recognised as a priority by the Community Planning Partnership, and this is reflected at locality level within our communities in terms of a number of the LOIPs that have positioned that work clearly within the action that needs to be taken within our communities. Each community board has received a presentation on the Act Now strategic approach on behalf of the Community Planning Partnership, and this will be a key element of the development of the LOIPs going forward. Community champions, our community champions, will be the guardians of ensuring that this issue remains a priority for the community boards, ensuring that local communities are kept fully informed of local actions and developments to encourage everyone to play an active role. In closing, just in terms of a recent development, the Community Partnership team have been involved in providing support to develop the Climate Action Towns initiative, particularly in the Holy Town area. This initiative builds on existing local knowledge and community networks to develop a climate action plan for Holy Town as one of the 6 towns being targeted by Architecture and Design Scotland, and there'll be more on that initiative, which has the potential to be rolled out to other areas in North Lanarkshire. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Lausanne. Jordan, would you like to ask a question, please?
Thanks, Leader. 2 questions from me, if you don't mind. The latter one probably not specifically to Lausanne. Lausanne, thanks. You've outlined some of the ways in which we can engage with communities, particularly referencing the Climate Plan Act 2030. Key, I think, to all of this, and something that was mentioned at a conference I was at recently, was the fact that the council as an entity can take action to reduce its carbon contribution, but strategically in the wider context of North Lanarkshire, the area, rather than North Lanarkshire, the council. How do we provide leadership in supporting that wider geographical area beyond ourselves to reduce their carbon output? So considering the support we offer for community planning partners, the third sector and business to collectively take action, you've mentioned some of the strategic planning, but how are we taking a leading role in coordinating and bringing these people round the table to consider North Lanarkshire the place as part of our carbon reduction plans and climate change plans?
A very challenging question. I'll ask Lausanne to respond to it, but I'll also ask Des and Robert if they would like to make a contribution.
Thanks, Leader. Would you like me to save my second question, Leader?
If you don't mind,
no problem.
It would probably be better, Jordan. We'll come back to you. Lausanne, have you any focus on the question that Jordan has asked?
Thank you for the offer of backup, Leader. I think I'll probably need it on that particular issue, but I do know that, for example, there is significant engagement that's on an ongoing basis as part of the Act 21 business conference, and James will maybe pick up on some of that and some of my colleagues. But I suppose in terms of the council, you're looking specifically how we influence what is happening within our communities and from the business sense. I'll give you an example of a very small example, but our museum service, as you're aware, has a number of retail outlets. So what we're looking at is very localised product lines being introduced into those retail outlets, and I suppose an encouragement for people to engage in local activity rather than travel further afield and thereby reduce our carbon emissions. But I think it's a broader strategic question that Councillor Linden is asking. So I'll give ground to my colleagues on that and ask them to come in and provide a bit of support for the answer to that question. Thank you.
Des, do you want to go first, then Robert, and then I'll ask James if James has any particular focus on it as well. Des.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. So I'll start with, members may recall, about 2 years ago, last August, we started a project called the Economic Regeneration Delivery Plan. And that was about mapping our economy in North Lanarkshire, all those current investors, that current place that made up all those jobs and livelihoods. and what that needs to look like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time, not only to sustain jobs and employability, but also to play its part in terms of recovering climatic impact, and what we could do as a sector, as a place, to actually be almost an exemplar for change to happen. So the council, as you rightly said, Councillor Linden, has a lot to play within that in terms of its investment activity, how it leads by example, what it does around digital, what it does around infrastructure. But more importantly, we actually also have direct engagement with now all those current and existing employers, and indeed those new employers that we bring to the area. That's what I was talking about earlier when I referenced the kind of climate credentials of potential investors. And from that engagement work, which is led by our enterprise team, I mean, it's pretty much fair to say, although I'm speaking on their behalf, those business, those sectors, those industries absolutely see those climate credentials as a core part now of their business offer, i.e. they will not succeed without being absolute ambassadors of now what change needs to happen and what they can do to drive that change through their own investment in technology, through their own innovation, through their own employability, etc. And there's numerous examples of that in terms of the new investment activities taking place in North Lanarkshire, the kind of changing kind of sectors. I don't want to refer back to North Lanarkshire's industrial past, that is a matter of the past, but its future is in a much more diverse place, much more investment in small, medium enterprise companies, huge range of ambition and growth and opportunity. But what links them all together is that absolute commitment around climate and what they need to do to change to support that need to further invest in recovery within the climate. So we're seeing that support. The very first example of the conferences that both James and Lausanne referred to was the business engagement conference, with businesses from across North Lanarkshire wanting to come and listen to each other and learn from each other about what perhaps they could do more to accelerate that programme of activity. So there's a very, very healthy kind of network now established around all of this. It fundamentally forms part of our economic regeneration delivery plan, what I say our economy will look like in 5, 10, 15 years' time. And I say the climate is at the core and at the heart of that. Anything you wish to add to that, Robert?
Yeah, well, I suppose without repeating that, anything that Des or Lausanne have said, that there are specific examples. And I would go first of all right back to what Andrew said. Remember, when we're collecting waste, that's not the council's waste. We're collecting waste from households, and we're collecting waste from small businesses who rely on the council to collect their waste, and we then manage the recycling of that waste. And as Andrew very well outlined, going to the energy from waste plant, which we're hoping will be carbon neutral by 2030. So we're doing that on behalf of the wider community. But we also have to remember that we're one partner in a community planning partnership. The community planning partnership isn't the council, and the council isn't the place. It's all of those agencies, as well as everyone who lives in all the voluntary groups that actually carry out those activities. And I think we need to remember that we can learn as much from those people, and they can lead us as much as we can lead them. And certainly anyone who was at the climate conferences that we held online over the last 6 months, we'll see there's some fantastic examples of businesses and groups within North Lanarkshire who are doing great things. We also have to remember that in terms of our housing service have a responsibility and in fact a duty to undertake schemes on behalf of all housing tenures. That's private housing, private rented, and other social landlords, as well as ourselves. And we administer grant schemes, and we actually undertake schemes specifically targeted to include private houses as well as our own housing stock. So we are actually taking forward this whole agenda on behalf of as many stakeholders within the community as we possibly can. And it comes back to what Des has just said. I think the key thing that we can do is be an exemplar and lead by example, and take forward those fleet changes, the waste changes, the changes we're taking to our properties to show people it can be done. And frankly, but by the council doing that, and by the council generating a supply chain, that supply chain can service everyone in North Lanarkshire as we move towards 2030 and the wider national targets into 2045. So I think we're doing a lot, but do you know what? This is a developing field, and I'll just give the example of Project PACE, where the council with Transport Scotland and Scottish Power Energy Networks put in a huge number of electric vehicle charging points, not for council vehicles, for use by anyone who wants to use those charging points, and we will continue to lead on that, and we'll continue to work with those wider partners to make sure that we get that external investment brought in as well, because that's something that we actually can do, is make sure that we lever in as much investment for the area as we possibly can through the influence and through the responsibilities the council has. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Robert and Des. That's been very helpful. James, you want to make any comments solely in response to the question posed by Councillor Linden? I'll give you an opportunity later on to close off the report. Anything in relation to the question?
I think the point's been covered very well by my colleagues, which actually illustrates one of the points I was making at the start about how we are taking such a strategic approach across all services of the council. We could give loads of examples and how we're doing that. There's other things in terms, for example, in the local outcome improvement plans and the work that's getting done with community boards. All of them have got environment in as a priority. There's a lot of work getting done through tenants' participatory programmes as well. And the final point I'd want to make is I made reference to the climate plan earlier. That's a climate plan for North Lanarkshire, not just for North Lanarkshire Council. But the points that have been made illustrate what I was saying at the start about how this is becoming an embedded in what we're doing in the council and with our partners, and that will continue to help it become embedded in the work we're doing across all of society.
Thanks very much, James. Jordan, do you wish a supplementary to your initial question? Do you want to move on to your second question?
I'm happy to move on to my second question. Thanks, Leader. I appreciate the answer and the time given. Actually builds on the point that James has just talked about in terms of our strategic approach, and it's something that I would like officers to consider, and indeed yourself, Leader, as one of the committee chairs, thinking about how we do reporting to committee in the context of net zero by 2030 and climate and the climate challenge. I've noticed other authorities are doing something similar to what I'm about to suggest. Is there an opportunity to strengthen our reporting structures to include climate impact under section 4 of our committee reports? We currently have impact included, and in terms of audit and scrutiny and governance, perhaps there's an opportunity to strengthen our remit as elected members in keeping that climate challenge at the heart of everything that we do right across Corporate Council, by seeing the climate everything through the guise of the climate impact where appropriate, and challenging officers to do exactly the same. Is that something that officers would think would be worthwhile, as well as members, Leader?
An excellent question, Jordan. Des, do you want to respond to that? Maybe I'll call in Archie or Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Gavin. I can give a very short answer. The answer is yes. It's absolutely something we should be doing. We've been looking at it recently within the corporate management team, basically the template that we use for committee reports to make sure that as services come forward with the progress they're making on any area of activity, whatever it may be across the council, that fundamental elements now, such as impact upon the climate, impact upon the economy, impact upon place, are all considered and form part of that process. So that is our intent at the present moment in time. It's just ensuring that we bring it forward with the right guidance, so we get a consistency of approach across the services community.
Archie, Andrew, Rose, any comments from either of you?
Leader, that I absolutely agree with Des. There is no issue at all about doing what's being suggested by Councillor Linden.
Andrew, are you in unison?
Yes, I am, Leader.
Right, thank you very much. There are no other names in the chat bar. An opportunity to ask any more questions? No. James, would you like to round off the report? And my apologies for losing connectivity in the middle of your first presentation. James.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to yourself in a moment, Leader, for the recommendations, but just very briefly in terms, I think the report shows the volume of work that's getting done across the council area and the breadth of the work that's getting done as well. And we really, in a meeting today, can only kind of, to some extent, highlight that and highlight the key parts of that. But I think we have to remember as well that there's a lot of people across the council that have contributed to the work that we're doing. There's a lot of people that have contributed to the 48% reduction in the carbon emissions. All our head teachers have been involved over this year in the COP26 events, etc. Colleagues in the enterprise team who are not in the meeting today, as the chief executives mentioned, the work that they've been doing with businesses and local businesses and attracting businesses into North Lanarkshire as well. And our managers who are out there managing the capital plans, managing the revenue budgets, etc. as well. When we approach this year, we've been on a bit of a journey to improve what we're doing in carbon management in the council over the last 3 years or so. And this year we deliberately targeted it this year to, well, actually did it last year and the pandemic came in, but then it was pushed forward to this year to take advantage of the fact that COP26 was being held in Scotland. It was being held, almost on our just outside our door, and really get this embedded in the work that we're doing in the council. As elected members, you set the challenge to us when you set the climate emergency, and I think what we've done is we've shown that we are approaching that. But I think we also need to realise as well, as we go forward, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need to apply the same kind of rigour and vigour to what we've been doing recently, and take that forward as we go forward. We will continue to report this subject matter primarily through the Environmental and Transportation Committee, but at any time, any other what's happened this year, other committees have asked us for information, and we'd be more than happy to do that as we go forward.
Thanks very much to the four heads of service for highlighting the operational changes that are taking place in their own service, to Des and Robert for highlighting the critical importance of having a coherent strategic approach. Hopefully the presentations today reassures members of the Council's determination to achieve net zero by 2030, and regular reports will be tabled in future meetings. So thank you very much, colleagues. Can I now direct you to page 19 of the report, your agenda papers? You'll see there are 2 recommendations there and 1 recommendation in page 20. Do you agree to the 3 recommendations? Thank you very much for your support. It then takes us to item 5, in the Enterprise Strategic Vehicle, an update and future development. James, can I hand over to you, please? James.
Thank you very much, Leader. Again, this is a subject matter which has been reported to committee on previous occasions. And we felt it was important to report back to this to committee at this time to give an update on the progress that's been done to date, and along with the planned future work. So it's quite a lengthy report, quite a technical report in some extent, but what I want to do is focus on a small number of key areas in the report. And if I can refer you first of all to paragraph 2.1.7 in the report. And you'll be aware that we were previously carrying forward a procurement exercise in this regard, and it became clear to us early in the year is that we needed to rethink our approach to that procurement exercise. The market conditions were very challenging at that time, and that was demonstrated by the response that we got from the market at that time. But what we didn't do is we didn't just become disheartened at that time. The ambition that we still have in this piece of work is still valid, and it's still something which I believe that we could take forward. So we did, through the summer months, we carried out engagement sessions with the market, and you'll see the bullet points there that are in 2.17. The market were still very supportive of what the council was doing, but the scale and the scope of the project at that time, linking into all the prevailing market conditions, was difficult, and for that reason we had to start thinking of an alternative approach. Now, we considered that as a project board, and we came to a view that we should still have the same ambition, but look to see whether we could deliver the project differently. So I can then refer you to paragraph 2.2.5 of the report. Excuse me. And what we've done is we've split the project down into 2 phases in that report. And I'm not going to go through the bullet points here in any great detail. Just in summary, phase 1 is to put in successor arrangements for large current strategic contracts which are coming to an end of their lifespan, those being the housing and corporate maintenance, gas servicing, and also roads and winter services. And we'll also take the opportunity to consolidate a large number of contracts in that process as well. Excuse me, if I can then refer you to paragraph 2.9, you'll see in there the areas that we are intended to take forward in the first phase of the project, and we're working on that at the present time. And if I direct you to paragraph 2.2.13 and through to 2.2.17, you'll see that we are currently continuing to carry out market engagement to make sure that the market is staying with us. with the services that we wish to put out to contract in the near future. And if I can direct you to section 2.2.18, the social value section of the report, these are all examples of things that we still expect to get out of this contract activity going forward. We get these benefits out of our current contract activity, but we plan to get even better outcomes from our contract activity going forward, and that's in areas such as employment, education and skills, supply chain development and opportunities, community engagement and capacity building, environmental issues, which we've just covered 40 minutes on, and also in innovation as well. So in summary, what the report is the report's a conclusion of a lot of work which the project board has been doing over the summer months. The project board has supported the paper, as has the council management team. We've presented this paper to the council management team as well. And it does show that through our procurement activity and delivery models, we can still deliver better outcomes for the residents of North Lanarkshire Council going forward. There's 3 appendices attached to the report. I'd like to just draw your attention to 2 of those appendices. Appendix 1, which gives an overview of the revised delivery model. We've been testing that internally within the council, and we've been testing that within externally with the market as well. The feedback that we're getting at this point is very productive. And Appendix 3, which is a procurement timetable, and you'll see, for example, in the housing and corporate services contract, we'd expect that the timetable would end with the contract commencing in January 2024, and the roads and winter services that would be June 2024, and that is in line with our procurement plans going forward.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I appreciate this is a highly technical question, a highly technical report, but hopefully it demonstrates that progress has been made since we last considered it in March 20, and we have moved on from there. Any comments, questions? I don't see any on the chat bar. Can I then direct you to page 40? There are 5 recommendations in page 40.
Convener, Councillor Brandon McVeigh is just
apologies, Councillor Heather Brandon McVeigh. Apologies, Heather. Heather? So you're on mute, Heather. No.
There must be a technical issue, Convener, because I can see Councillor Brandon McVeigh isn't on mute.
She's suffering the same issue that I was subjected to. Suffered, right? No, we've now lost her. Okay, I'll give her an opportunity. No, she's waving. It doesn't matter. So, okay, I ask you to agree to the 5 recommendations. Agreed. It then takes us to agenda item 6, and this is a report in relation to the Triton Community Hub contract award, and it focuses on the specifics of the contract award. James, is there anything you want to highlight?
Thank you, Leader. Every time we are coming towards contract award for one of the Town and Community Hub projects, we are required to bring a report to committee. It's usually this committee, sometimes it's Education and Families Committee. It really depends on the point where we're about to award contract. So what this report does is it seeks permission to conclude the contract awards for 2 projects, 2 important projects, the Christon Community Hub project and also the Canonbro and Siteside Community Hub project. And section 2.1 provides detail of the Christon Community Hub project, which will also include a health centre within the campus. And this contract will be awarded to Robertson's Construction. The costs are detailed in paragraph 2.1.7 and they're fully budgeted for, and the details in the report has been considered fully by the Town and Community Hub project board within the council. Section 2.2 provides details of the Canonbro Siteside Community Hub project. That contract would be awarded to Morgan Shindle. Again, the costs are detailed in the report in 2.2.7 and they also are fully budgeted for. Final financial commitment within the figures detailed in the report will be approved via the hub delivery process, and again that's similar to previous projects going forward. You'll see in the risk section of the report, paragraph 4.6, prices are fixed to the end of this calendar year, so we can get this contract signed off before the end of this month. We're now in, we will have these prices fixed. And it's important that we conclude the contract awards in this timescale because, as members are aware, the volatility which is in the construction market at this time. And all checks and balances have been carried out to date, and we'll continue to do that as we go forward. And the recommendations are contained in page 53 of your agenda.
Colleagues, I don't see any names on the chat bar. Can I direct you to the recommendations on page 53? There are 5 recommendations there, and hopefully we'll now see progress ensuing from agreement today. Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. It takes us to item 7 on the agenda. It's the Leadership Operating Model, Phase 1 for Future Workplace Model, and this is to meet the challenges of an ever-changing environment. I invite Fiona to make comment. Fiona.
Thank you, Leader. So the last 18 months have brought about significant changes to our workplace arrangements for all employees across the council, and throughout this time we have consistently engaged. Can you not hear me? You can hear me. Sorry, we lost the leader again, potentially. Will I start again? Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, so throughout this time, we've consistently engaged with our staff.
We don't hear you, Fiona. Try again, please.
Okay, so throughout this time, we have consistently engaged with our staff and trade unions.
I think we're in danger of losing you again from what...
I think it might be yourself, Leader, again. So I'm going to keep going, if that's okay. So our focus in terms of engaging staff has been to fully understand how the staff are actually coping with these significant changes, but more importantly, as we go forward, to seek their input on our future workplace arrangements and as we progress into the next phase of the pandemic. So this report now sets out a roadmap for how we plan to transition to a future workplace model for the council, taking on board the significant learnings of the last 18 months and with a focus on building a resilient and flexible model, but also one which must be responsive to the ongoing challenges of our new COVID environment, not least with the impact of the new variant that we've seen in the last week. Importantly, the model presented fully aligns with the council's previously stated aims and ambitions set out in the vision, and particularly our delivering for communities report, and provides a basis for us to also accelerate our already stated desire to build a more agile and collaborative workplace which allows staff to work closer to and within their communities. Moving to the report, you will note in section 2.1 through 2.3 that despite the significant changes in our workplace, the council has continued to deliver an excellent service to our communities over the last 18 months. This is across all services, and in particular those who've operated in very challenging circumstances, where some of our frontline workers within these services have at times struggled to access even basic welfare and office facilities, with previous locality and community-based facilities being closed. In recognition of this, an early focus in delivering our new workplace model is our plan for how we will support the needs of our agile frontline workforce through the provision of 5 new community-based hubs, with the expansion of these planned in a phased rollout over the coming years and as we bring our wider community hub model to life. So the phasing of that work is set out for you in section 2.8, table 1, and you'll note that the proposed timing of those new facilities, in particular in phase 1, will see us making those 5 new hubs available to staff before the end of the year, and in particular as the winter period approaches. So examples of some of the staff who will be able to access these facilities are set out for you in section 2.11 of the report. And I should note at this point that all controls and mitigations will be in place within these workplace facilities to keep the staff safe at this time. The locations and arrangements for the first 5 hubs are set out in section 2.13 to 2.16 of the report. And you'll note in figure 1 that we anticipate that the future ongoing usage of these hubs will be in the region of 7,400 agile posts. If I move to phase 1 arrangements for our previously office-based staff, you'll see in section 2.19 figure 2 that we currently have around 1,700 employees who are either fully working from home or using home as a base location with occasional travel elsewhere. Although this staff group has been particularly affected by changes in the workplace, it's important to note that they represent just 10% of our total workforce. Sections 2.20 to 2.26 set out the details of the extensive engagement we have undertaken with these employees to determine their view around what that future workplace model should look like. This has outlined that the majority would prefer a hybrid working model with some time spent working in the office and some time spent at home, with 93% expressing a preference for that approach. So building on that wide engagement with staff and trade unions and with further input from managers and heads of service, we are now proposing a hybrid working model for those 1,700 staff with one category of hybrid worker. And the details of this are set out in sections 2.27 to 2.35. And members will note that in phase one, we are proposing that hybrid workers spend a minimum of 6 days in phase one, so 6 days in a fixed office setting. The proposed timing in the report for the transition to this model for those previously office-based staff states January to March 2022, but this will be wholly dependent on the rates of transmission in the communities, especially following the festive break. And we will very much proceed with that hybrid working model in line with government guidance for that staff group, where there's a strong message currently of people working at home where they can. So I want to emphasise that our trade union colleagues have been fully involved in this work at all stages, and they are in receipt of a copy of the report. They've also been further reassured this week that with the discovery of cases of the variant in North Lanarkshire, that the Council will not move to bring employees back into office settings before Public Health and Scottish Government guidance allows for us to do that. Section 2.48 details the full communication and engagement plan now in place to support our Agile staff accessing those 5 new hub facilities. This includes high quality video content and materials to make it easy for staff, and this will be implemented following your approval of the model today. So in summary, we're now seeking approval for the proposed direction of travel in the report and our future workplace model, including the planned timescales to make our community-based provision for Agile workers operational before the winter, and only when government guidance allows in early 2022 to take forward the proposed hybrid model for previously office-based staff. So I'll take any questions at this point.
3 members have indicated so far. Could I ask Jordan, do you want to start, please? Jordan.
Thanks, Leader. A few questions on this particular paper, if you don't mind, and thanks, Fiona, for taking us through it. In the context of the paper, Fiona, how does it pave the way for future flexibilities in terms of our employees and their desires, be that to work from home more, or indeed the opposite, to get back to a hub or a building for work, particularly as we move forward into the non-COVID context? Obviously, COVID exacerbates these things and brings it into sharper focus, but how do we, as we move forward, consider that flexible working approach to tailor it to our individual employees? Secondly, turning to the specifics, who will access the hubs? Is it staff only? Some members have raised concern around shared use of the facilities for vulnerable clients, or perhaps people for whom accessing a shared hub wouldn't be appropriate, particularly where they're co-located. Thirdly, could you possibly outline the nature of that trade union engagement? Understand the people survey and the high support, which is really, really welcome. It's great to hear that strength of feeling, but what did that trade union engagement look like? And finally, in terms of the hubs being delivered, will any of them have an impact on the delivery of existing services where they're having a facility that's using them or hosting them, for example, Cumbernauld Theatre? Thanks, Leader.
Fiona, do you want to respond, please?
Yeah, so Leader, I'm going to pick up 2 of those questions, and then I'm going to ask my colleague Janie O'Neill, who's been involved in the hubs, just to pick up the other 2. So I'll pick up the point about the wider model and flexibilities in the trade union engagement, if that's okay. So in terms of the first question, Councillor Linden, it's a balance, I think, as we go forward, of providing as much flexibility as we can to staff to access fixed office facilities and also those hubs. Now, we're going to because of the numbers I outlined, we're going to prioritise those frontline staff having access to the hubs in the first instance. and make fixed office fixed office space available to the 1700 staff. So it's really important to understand the balance of numbers, with 90% of our staff already out working in communities, and an urgent need for us to support them better. For office-based staff, the model is proposing that we use those fixed office spaces, but there's the flexibility is around those 6 days. But we will monitor that situation in the next phase. There's also opportunity within our smarter working policy for people to apply for a change to that. So it's a minimum of 6 days, so they can come in more days than that, but also equally, if they want to work less days, they can apply through our smarter working policy to work less than 6 days, or indeed to have a fully based at home model if the service dictates that it's okay for them to do that. So it's all built in to the model and the flexibilities for individual staff, and we will work through each of those individual cases between January and March, or when we start to switch that hybrid working model on. So it's all supported in there, Councillor Linden. In terms of trade union engagement, it's quite a difficult question for me to answer because it's just constant and ongoing. So not only will they have been consulted on the major elements of the actual scheme, really from the start when we put the interim scheme in place, but that they're consulted on a regular basis in terms of the reports, and they've certainly got a copy of the report. So I certainly am very confident, if you spoke to them yourself, that you would find they're very comfortable at this point about where we are. So hopefully that answers those two questions, and that's given Janie maybe some thinking time on the other two questions. Janie, if you want to come in.
Okay, thanks very much. If that's okay to come in then, convener. Thanks.
Okay, Janie.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Linden, for the questions. So in terms of the access to the hubs, I think Fiona has picked up on aspects of that, but moving forward out of phase one, which is initially indeed to meet the welfare needs of our frontline staff over the challenging winter months ahead and ensure that they have somewhere where they can go and access. Moving into phase two, which is from April onwards, although we're hopeful we'll be able to switch it on a wee bit earlier, it's community-based hubs, so it's very much about access for our communities, to support our communities, and indeed for working closely with our partners and continue to work closely with partners. So that is absolutely the plan as part of the phasing. And then obviously beyond that, we're implementing as we go within the next, the period of time, longer term 2025 to 31, it's the implementing the full town and community-based hubs model. So absolutely initially it is for our staff, however very quickly we would be switching that on in the more medium term to the community and our partners. As regards the second question for myself, Councillor Linden, if it's okay to move on to that, you asked about the impact on existing service delivery, and we do not anticipate any impact on our existing service delivery. Our partners, for example, Cumbernauld Theatre you referenced, are fully aware and have been fully involved since the start of our pilot, our proof of concept hubs, which are going to be switched on before the end of the year. We have been in conversations with them throughout, and therefore we do not anticipate any impact on service delivery across the hubs which are referenced as part of phase one.
Gordon, would you like a supplementary to the question?
Yep. Thanks, Leader. Thanks, Janie, for answering those questions. Coming back to the kind of former question, if you may, I think one of the things that I was trying to seek clarity on is as we move forward from the April rollout onwards, where we have these the community hub approach. I guess what the question I'm trying to ask is that there are some settings where we will have community hubs that will be shared campus, maybe next to a school, it may be next to community facilities, where it may not be appropriate for a particular service user in a department, social work, for example, subject to regulations, etc., to access those facilities, and just to provide reassurance, I guess, to anybody listening and indeed to members who may wish to ask the question that where it is not deemed appropriate, that won't happen, obviously. I think it is sort of intrinsically implied, but nonetheless, I think just to provide that clarity.
Apologies, Councillor Linden.
Janie, you want to give reassurance, please?
Yes, apologies, Councillor Linden. Yes, I will absolutely, convener. Yes, I can give you that reassurance, indeed, Councillor Linden, that will not be the case. It will not be used by clients and services. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from Councillor Beveridge. Alan, please.
Thanks, convener. I think the hybrid system is working superbly well, although it's not been working well today for the leader, and maybe that's a wee training need that the leader's got. I'm sure he'll appraise himself off that. But in any case, what I'm getting from the hybrid system is fantastic, because officers are on here. They respond at all times at night to emails. They're working. It's working superbly well. I think the officers are readily available. But I think Fiona's covered the point I was wishing to make. It's regarding the minimum of 6 days. The home workers are having to work in an office. That, just to reinforce it, that will not be set in stone. It says minimum of 6 days. I don't see the point of somebody having forced to come in to work in an office when they can work satisfactorily at home, as it was already done just now. So will that be sort of rigorously adhered to, this 6 days minimum rule? Thanks.
I think Fiona's already touched on that. Fiona, you want to amplify it again on that point?
So I think, Councillor Beveridge, what we've done is put a consistent framework in the first instance, because I think one of the things that's very important about this is that we treat staff fairly across the board. So we will initially, and in temporary contract variations, put that 6 days in there with that expectation. But as I say, there's other flexibilities within that in terms of applications through the Smarter Working Policy, and we will expect the services themselves to go through a period of transition where they work out how that all works. But in the first instance, the reason it's in there and the reason it will be put in people's contract variations is we need a consistent and fair model, and then we can adapt it from that point based on the individual flexibilities and what the service requires. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Next question from Councillor Barclay. Claire, please.
Thanks, Leader. All my questions have been asked and answered, so you don't have to hear any more from me, but thanks for the report.
I was looking forward to it too. That's right, Claire. Any further comments, questions from any other members? If not, can I direct you? There are two very clear and succinct recommendations in page 60. Do we agree to both recommendations? Okay. The next is agenda item 8. And the latest update from Andrew Rose on the operation of the hybrid committee meetings and remote elected member surgeries. Over to you, Andrew, please.
Thank you, Convener. This report is a follow-up to the one approved by the Council in October, at which the appropriate permissions and decisions were put in place to allow hybrid committee meetings to be held. It seeks to provide clarity to members on a route map for commencing hybrid meetings. However, since the report was written, and as per communication I issued to all elected members this week, we've experienced a number of technical problems during installation, so there has been a delay to the timeline outlined in the report. We're hoping that we'll be able to commence implementation as soon as possible in the new year. The report also highlights the various committees of the Council into whether it is envisioned that they will meet via the hybrid system, continue to meet fully remotely, or whether they can meet fully in person. But as always, we will adhere to public health guidance, which could affect the implementation timetable. Paragraphs 2.3 and 2.4 provide clarity on the matters of public viewing and how voting will take place in either a hybrid or fully remote meeting or for a fully in-person meeting. And finally, paragraph 2.6 reiterates that members are encouraged to hold their surgeries remotely, and that guidance has been issued to elected members on this. Thank you.
Any comments, questions in relation to Andrew's presentation? Alan, please, Councillor Beveridge.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, Councillor Logue. I think that's the same for all elected members, or MPs and MSPs as well. They have been told the same, that at this time they're encouraging everybody to use hybrid surgeries. Andrew, thanks.
I'm not sure whether we can speak on behalf of MPs, MSPs. Andrew, Archie, do you want to make any contribution to the question?
Yes, Leader. Sorry, I was just about to say MSPs and MPs are outside the remit of the Council to dictate how they operate their business arrangements. So we are confine ourselves purely to the role of elected members.
That's fine, Andrew. Thanks for that. We'll make sure that conduct our business as safely as possible. Thank you.
Next question from Councillor Barclay. Claire, please.
Thanks, Leader. It's just checking under 2.2.3, Andrew, it's got the quasi-judicial ones are to be fully in person. Is there flexibility on that? I'm just considering, I mean, going down the line, if you have somebody that's coming forward either to one of those committees but is either shielding or doesn't feel safe to be able to come into the environment of the civic, is there still going to be flexibility for those committees to be hybrid, or is this, if we agree to this, it means that they must be fully in person?
Andrew, I'm happy to come in on that, if I may. Yeah, thanks. So, a major difficulty in holding quasi-judicial or regulatory hearings remotely, and I'm stating the obvious here, I know, is that where there are connectivity issues, then any member who drops out even for a very, very short period of time hasn't heard all of the submissions stroke evidence that's been led at the hearing. And accordingly, because of the quasi-judicial nature, is really debarred then from participating any further. So it's as simple as that. I appreciate that in certain circumstances, if the individual themselves has issues around health, then there may be scope to look at that. But certainly in terms of the participation of the members of the regulatory committee or licensing board or HR appeals sub, for them to participate with confidence that they're going to be able to participate in the decision making at the end, then our view is that there needs to be personal attendance. Does that assist, Councillor?
Claire, are you happy with that?
Yeah, it's just obviously being part of the regulatory committee on the whole, it's been pretty successful being able to do it, you know, online. That yeah, there has been times, but really on the whole, it has been a successful exercise. And I'm thinking more, yeah, as a councillor, you have the opportunity whether or not that you decide to sit on that committee if you don't want to be part of going into. But if you are somebody who's being brought in front of the committee to answer any questions or anything that really at the end of the day could be to do with your livelihood, but because of the circumstances, there would be no facility for you to be able to do that remotely. And it's just for that facility to be built in. It could be that we're all in the civic, but the person that's coming in front of us for specific circumstances, would they be able to come remotely? I feel as if I'm just concerned that we're setting this in stone when to make sure that there could be an element of flexibility in this.
Archie, can we incorporate flexibility in this process?
We can, Leader. I have to say I'm probably less concerned about an individual's issues with connectivity, because we would simply just have to keep going until they had the opportunity to make their case. The focus on the report was in terms of the elected members. So yes, we can absolutely do that.
Hopefully that reassures you, Claire. I don't see any other names on the chat bar. Can I direct you to page 73? There are 2 recommendations. Do you agree to the recommendations? Colleagues, it takes us to item 9, and this was forwarded to us by Leslie. It's the report in relation to the National Transfer Scheme for Unaccompanied Asylum-Seeking Children. It's a 7-page report. Can I invite Alison to speak to the report? Alison, please.
Thanks, Leader. And thanks for accepting the late report, but you'll see from the content that it is to provide an update on changes that were made to this scheme only last week. Members will recall that back in September there was a decision by North Lanarkshire to participate on a voluntary basis in the National Transfer Scheme for Unaccompanied Asylum-Seeking Children. And the purpose of the report is to bring members up to date with the implications of moving to a mandatory scheme, and then with a particular focus on also how that impacts on North Lanarkshire's participation to date on a voluntary basis. So section 1 of the report outlines the background to the scheme, and it reminds members of the discussion that was had back in September. Fundamentally, the scheme is intended to support the countrywide us meet the responsibilities to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and was instituted because historically there have been challenges around for particular local authority areas, mainly in the south of England, who have been disproportionately affected by the numbers of children who appear at points of entry, and more so even since the primary route of arrival has been by boat. So a previous national transfer scheme was engaged with only by a couple of local authorities in Scotland, and that was due to deficits in the scheme and some challenges around the funding of the scheme, which were outlined in the previous paper. Following the revision of the scheme and the relaunch of the scheme, the voluntary scheme back in July this year, there was agreement to Scotland-wide participation, facilitated and coordinated through COSLA. And similarly, as I said, North Lanarkshire agreed to be one of the local authorities participating back in September time. The framework, and it's always quite difficult talking about people's lives as allocations and in numbers, but the framework really is based on a principle that areas should be willing to have up to 0.07% of their child population in relation to numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in North Lanarkshire, as with most areas in Scotland, is below that just now. According to the rota that was agreed by COSLA leaders back in August, North Lanarkshire would receive 3 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children per cycle of 650 who were transferred to different areas across the UK. And following the agreement by COSLA in August and our own council agreement in September, we have been working with other local authorities and COSLA colleagues to implement that arrangement. Just last week, however, government indicated that their intention was to move to a mandatory scheme, something that was always recognised as a potential risk. And on the back of that, all local authorities, including our own, got formal notice under the Immigration Act of that proposal to move to a mandatory scheme and offer specific allocation of unaccompanied asylum seekers per child per cycle, which also in the Home Office formula would be 3. We have 14 days to respond to that mandatory notice, but it's very clear that the bar for non-compliance, or to set out a reasonable reason for non-compliance, is high. Clearly, anybody that's following the news will be aware that part of the reason to escalate and move to a mandatory scheme has been that the crisis in relation to the ability to accommodate new arrivals has continued. And while Scottish participation was clearly secured under the previous arrangement, that was not the case across the whole of the UK, and there are currently over 300 young people waiting to be accommodated and transferred through the scheme, over 200 of whom have no local authority, even on a temporary basis, taking responsibility for them, but who are accommodated in unsuitable hotel accommodation. Therefore, there has been an urgency about this. In response to the new arrangements or the new proposals, COSLA clearly have facilitated some early discussion with local authorities, and there was discussion also at COSLA leaders meeting last week, where Scotland, via COSLA, wanted to reaffirm their commitment to support unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and resettlement in general for those fleeing persecution and war. There was an agreement to express concern to the Home Office about the mandation of the scheme when there was strong voluntary participation from Scotland. And there was also a proposal agreed that the scheme effective date should be the 1st of October and not the 23rd of November. And the reason that's significant is that Scottish participation started on the 1st of October. The new mandatory notifications effectively restart the clock on the 23rd of November. And what that potentially would mean for local authorities like North Lanarkshire, who have already received young people, is that that potentially would not be considered as fulfilling their requirements under the first cycle of the scheme. So for us, that is significant. There is information in sections 2.6 to 2.8 of the report about our approach in North Lanarkshire today and how the scheme has been implemented. We are one of the local authorities who have made early offers in terms of placements, and we have, as I said, had 3 young people placed through the scheme since the beginning of October. We also, during that period of time, have had another young person spontaneously arrive in North Lanarkshire. We have progressed with a model that, although the young people are over 16, we are very aware of the trauma and the difficult circumstances in which they arrive with us. So whilst others have adopted models which are based on supported accommodation, we are receiving young people first into our children's houses in North Lanarkshire so that we can fully assess their needs and aspirations and make sure that we have the capacity to support them intensively until we are confident that they can be suitably supported to move on. And in general, we're looking at supported care as a transition point for them. And that's particularly important because I think partly because of the pressures that there are where the young people are accommodated at this point in time in the south of England. They are not being well prepared for their move to us. They arrive by taxi with limited possessions, limited documentation. Some of them have got no information about where they are coming to. And that's led to us to actually begin some discussions with the Home Office about things that we can do to make those arrivals more child-centred in terms of sharing information, in terms of remote contact potentially before the moves, or in terms of actually staff going down and collecting young people. So that would be the approach that we would continue to endorse. I have set out at 2.9 of the report also some next steps that we would intend to take. One of the things that we need to do is build our capacity to continue to receive the young people who would be allocated to us. And we are looking to do some targeted recruitment of carers. But in relation to the position we're in just now with the move to the mandatory scheme, we first of all need to agree whether we make representations on that back to the Home Office. My recommendation would be that we do write accepting and restating our commitment to participation in the scheme, but in line with COSLA's proposal, looking for that to be from an effective date of the 1st of October. That we continue to work with COSLA and other local authorities to share learning and on implementation of the scheme in Scotland. There has, since the report was written, been a further meeting with COSLA at which the Home Office and Scottish Government were represented. And the message there was that there is some flexibility in the implementation of the rota in Scotland, as long as Scotland as a region takes the numbers that have been allocated. That's quite difficult to facilitate at this point in time because legally the onus is on individual councils to write and advise whether or not they accept the allocations that they have been given under the Home Office formula, and therefore COSLA and lead officers can't revert to further work on a Scottish scheme until we know the outcome of that. For other local authorities, the numbers differ across the two schemes, the COSLA and the Home Office rota, For us, effectively, it's the same. So it's in line with what members have already agreed. We would continue to try and look at what we can do also, obviously, to improve the quality of planning in order to support the arrivals with us. So, Leader, I don't know if you...
Okay. Thanks very much, Alice.
Back to you for the recommendations.
I don't know if Jim's still with us. Jim, are you connected? Oh. Okay, can you just, Jordan, you wanted to come in?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, the first one, Jordan, do you want to ask your question, please?
Thanks, Leader. I'll come to my question in a minute. I just wanted to say I welcome the report, but I think that some of the language in it, frankly, breaks my heart. To listen to the way that we are, the way that we're talking about a humanitarian issue, and it's no criticism of officers because the language is inherent in the approaches that are adopted by the Home Office. But I reflect on some of the sections, and forgive me for highlighting some of them. Section 4.6, we're talking about human beings who have experienced war and tragedy, and yet we're talking about the costs and benefits of them coming here. Section 4.1, we talk about the unit cost of the placement, and then Section 2.7, we talk about them being taxied here, having very little on their hands and not knowing where they're going. And I find myself struggling to talk about it. I just think that these are human beings who are escaping the worst case scenarios that we will never experience, who are coming here, the guests giving us the privilege of calling North Lanarkshire their home now. And these are the issues that we have to consider. I know that these are the practicalities, but stripping it back, ultimately these are the things that this is what it comes down to. A plea again, and Alison, I feel like a broken record, but I know this is what the legislation says, but Section 4.1 mentions them being looked after again. And I think that regardless of whether where they've came from or their origin, they are now part of the care experience community in North Lanarkshire. So they're experiencing care rather than being looked after. And hopefully they'll be loved just as we love those who are care experienced in North Lanarkshire, and as we exercise our duties as corporate parents. My question then, given all of that, is, Alison, are we going as far as we can, as quick as we can here in North Lanarkshire to support those who are fleeing war and persecution?
Okay. So I think yes, within the boundaries we agreed, and also you'll be aware, Councillor Linden, that one of the things that we also wanted to do prior to our agreeing our participation and was fed back to the last committee was engage with our own young people as well, and try and seek support for the approach that we are taking. I think we could only go faster if we moved to looking at setting up different sorts of accommodation, I think, and my view would be that that isn't appropriate for the needs of those young people at this time. That we have, as I say, we're one of 10 local authorities who have already fulfilled their commitments in relation to the first cycle of the voluntary scheme. And we have also, as you will see, I've set out in the report, next steps proposed that should we have the capacity to move quicker to alleviate the pressures that are on in relation to young people who are currently accommodated in unsuitable hotel accommodation with no one taking responsibility for them, that we would do so. But I think what we would want to do, and it will probably be earlier than our obligations, would be once we have fully assessed and are able to identify appropriate plans for the young people we've received to date, we can plan, we would hope, at an earlier stage than perhaps the rota. And I agree with you, it's horrible talking about rotas in relation to receiving young people, but we would be able to take our next group of young people earlier than we would be than our obligation under the scheme. if we are able to do that in terms of planning. But we also want to get it right for those young people who are coming in to North Lanarkshire and offer the right sort of support. So the two things that we're doing is, making sure that we're getting the support right for those that are with us, planning, and where we have placement capacity, then we will move as early as we can to escalate the speed at which we receive young people. And the other bit you'll see is for targeted, so for the medium to long term, that we are moving over the next 3 months to targeted recruitment specifically to support this cohort of young people.
Thanks very much. Nick, Jordan, you want a supplementary? Next question from Councillor Banbury. Heather. Heather, can you hear us? No. Are there any other colleagues want to ask a question or make a point? If not, can I direct you then to the 4 recommendations in the first page of the report? Do you agree to the recommendations? Thank you very much. Councillors, that concludes the business. Can I thank you for your attendance today on the call? Can I apologise for the very significant connectivity issues we've experienced, but thank all officers and members for attending and for the contributions made. Thank you very much and stay safe. Thank you.